Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. All right, there you go. Hello, waiting for to start. Hello, Positive Philter listeners and people around the world. This is Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Well, everyone's a special guest because they take their time to join me on this show. Now, you know, I work at George Mason, and through that opportunity, you know, I get an opportunity to connect with so many different people, faculty, staff, but also students. And I also love to hear students' experiences on this podcast because, one, it reminds me how washed I am and how old I am, and two, it reminds me of the next generation and the youth going into the workplace and the things that they want to do in their lived experiences. So I'm actually really excited to be joined today by a young man, Teon. He does have different colors than me. You know, I ain't gonna hold him on that, but he is a great student leader on the campus. But Teon, go ahead and give the listeners a little bit about who you are. I was going to say that was phenomenally inspirational. But yeah, so my name is Teon Frazier, but most people just refer to me as T. I'm a senior at George Mason University, majoring in business with a concentration in business analytics and a minor in African American studies. So yeah, I'll be graduating this spring. So happy to get on out of there with all due respect. But yeah, I'm a member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. I am the outgoing associate regional director for the mighty Eastern region, so like second vice. Yeah, and I've just been doing all over. President of NPAC, Order of Omega, all that. I've lived a lot in these 4 years. You're very actively involved, and you're very actively involved coming in through COVID. You know, which was quite remarkable because you know. That could be a whole nother podcast about that experience of coming into college and then having that experience in person and how different that was. But, you know, I'm just going to straight up say the identity. You know, the thing that drew and the topic that I want to bring up is that I'm a father of two boys. And my wife is white. I'll just say what it is. And so my children are going to navigate the world experience as biracial children. And I know that you are not the representative of all team biracial, team, whatever. I'm the ambassador. But, I think these conversations are really helpful because I am starting to have very thoughtful dialogue with my son, he's 9, and he's so bright, and we're talking about it. And I just want to learn from your lived experience, how you talked about it, how you live this experience growing up as someone that is biracial. Just to share with me and my listeners, because I know there's probably a lot of fathers like myself that are going to have these conversations. Yeah, it's been an interesting. I'm 22, right? Yeah. And so I'm just now getting into adulthood, but like the growing up part of it, right, has always been really interesting to say the least. I don't even know where to begin, but I guess I'll start. So for context, so my dad, he's black, and his mother is also Filipino. So he had like a little bit going on, like just slight growing up with that. And my mother is white as well. And so I have an older sister, and basically growing up, it's always been an interesting experience because for context, if you look at all of us together, right, for the longest, me and my sister, we did not look like either of my parents' like children. We looked really adopted, right? Okay, different identity, okay. Yeah, so it was very, I don't know how for my family, I never really asked that question saying like, hey, so how did you navigate that? Because I know my dad, he would always talk about how whenever he would take us around, they would assume that we were like, me and my sister were Hispanic. Yeah. And so they were like, he's like, they're not, they're mine, And so you can get that sort of, like feeling of dang, so these are my kids, but the world out doesn't really see it that way. Yeah. It wasn't until I was growing up did it really strike me the peculiar situation that I was in.
for years. So I'm from PG County, Maryland, which is a predominantly black area, right? And so growing up at my elementary, middle, even I wasn't until like high school really, I was like the white kid, right? I was the lightest kid there. So you're white. So
and they would say and like kids say that, right?
Yeah.
They wouldn't say, "Oh, you're light skinned," or you're a fair skinned black person.
Yeah.
They would say you're white. They would say that. Or,
yeah. It was you're the white kid.
Okay.
And for me, the longest that was like an insult because growing up, like culturally wise, it was very much like my dad, all of that.
Yeah.
And you see in the like pop culture, at least as a kid, like processing it, you're like, oh, the white dude is the uncool one. You know what I'm saying? It was an insult.
Yeah.
And that's often how I took it because I'm like, well, I'm raised by my pops. I'm raised to be a black child in his eyes and even in my mom's eyes to that because I know that was like a silent fear of theirs. They're like, how do we have this conversation?
Yeah.
What age do you introduce that? Because right now you're just processing it. And, and that's a weird thing to even ask your parents on like race. Because at first it was like such a taboo topic, because young, like pre-K, you're learning about like MLK and all that. You're learning all about like racism and that. And so you start processing, you're like, when you put the pieces together as an interracial child, as a biracial child, you're like, oh, so like I have a black dad, a white mom. How did this happen? But also, what does that make me?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't until like middle school or anything like that did the notion of like the one drop rule start coming into play. And while living that, you're thinking, oh, so that automatically means like I should be black in everyone's eyes, but it doesn't feel that way because I'm still being called like the white kid.
Yeah.
I still don't look like that, even though like how I express myself with like my hair and all that is very much like associated to my community, which I claim is like the black community. And so to deal with that, it was like, dang, like how do I navigate that? And it wasn't until like high school, even college to some extent, I really start like accepting that, but also moving past it because for years I was like, dang, so is this all... That was like my plight. That was like my character arc, to be quite honest.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things I think about, too, is that, I think that preparation, and I don't know if your father has this, but my preparation is like this, right? Like Obama, he's black. No, he's, people say he's biracial, but the world views him as black.
Yep.
So as a father, I raised my kids, and I know I got in an argument with someone. I got in an argument like this weird, toxic argument, but I don't know. I stood on business because this was something very firm. I said, while I respect, their lineage and their white mother and their Irish family and all that stuff, the world is going to view them as other, no matter what. They're going to be viewed as black or a person of color. Thus, for me as a father, I'm going to prepare them as a child that's black rather than say, kumbaya. And the reason why I say that, because, I have this fear of like going into a space and being treated differently, and the kid, my son, is blindsided. So if I say, if I teach him, you're a black kid, you can't do the same thing as Johnny, you can't do that, especially because my kids are more in predominantly, well, they're in mixed spaces, but more white spaces. I'm like, you got to navigate this space. And so it was very early on, and I don't know if this is the best or right. I'm like, daddy's black, mommy's white, you black. And I said it like that too. I was like, you black. And we affirmed that. So I don't know, how was your dad doing that? Like he was like, yo, you black, boy.
Yeah, for the most part, it was that. And it's strange for my pops because like the way my pops conducts himself and carries himself as a black man, a lot of people wouldn't assume that he had like a white wife, right? You know what I'm saying? So like where he's from, like all that. And so I could tell at least a little bit on that side of things. It was almost like people, at least, let me ask you that. It's just like marrying like a white woman. There's often the assumption like, oh, well, they think of like turncoat, you know what I'm saying?
But
all
like
that.
They put a white woman on a pedestal that they don't have pride in themselves and all stuff like that.
And they're just like, how could you? And it's like, no, that's
no. So I mean, I think for me, that's the navigation as a black male is that I think there's relationships where black men have put down black women that it makes black men that are not with black women, they lump us all together.
Yeah.
And I think there's a way to separate that. You can elevate and support and love your black women. My mom's, you know, like to love that, but also be with a partner that's different. Yeah. I think the toxic or problematic part is when you see black men, and I'm going to call them out, that say, listen, my white wife does what I say, and the white woman is better.
Yeah,
and all
that's
that stuff.
when it gets toxic.
And that's toxic. And I think that reaffirms that, and it kind of lumps everyone together. So my understanding, and my way I navigate that is that I respect and uplift and love and support black women. And you see that my black women students, right?
Yeah.
I can't call them girls, they're women now, right? Yeah. It's crazy. But at the same time, my partner is white. That's what it is. You know, like,
that's just...
but I will say this though, for me in a interracial relationship is that for me, this is not the color blindness, but the values of my race is a strong tie. So my wife is a social worker, and I think that she grew up around social justice. Her father was an advocate for like anti-war. Actually, he was also an advocate at UVA for equitable rights for black students as well. And so those values transferred the color of her skin. Yeah. But like if I was with a white woman that did not see me as a black man and also was disparaging or not valuing my lived experience and kind of like saying things like, oh, everyone pull yourself by your bootstraps, or doesn't recognize systemic racism and oppression, that probably our marriage would not work. Yeah. So that's my answer to that. Like I can carry that identity, I can carry, but also understand that like I can value black women and be in an interracial relationship. And also my partner, ideally, has to be a person that sees me for who I am. Yeah. And the systemic issues and doesn't kind of like, you know, whitewash it and say, oh, that's easy, or doesn't acknowledge stuff.
Yeah. And I feel like that can go like a little bit of almost like both ways, because I know, at least for my pops and all that, and even my mom, because she's basically the same thing almost, where it's just like she's never denied like our identity. She doesn't put us down or anything like that. She doesn't like, well, you know, you are. She's like, you know what I'm saying, live your life, but also recognize like where you from, especially like how you grew up in your community. And so living in that county for like so many, like for my entire life almost, right? And I never really knew any white people outside of my mom and her family. Like I never interacted, never met anything like that. It wasn't until like high school and even college that I start going into that. And I believe that was when around the time I started to view it differently. And even then, because I love how you brought up like Obama and stuff like that, because as I grew up, I started looking more into that. I love this quote from Trevor Noah, who's also biracial. One of the things that he noted, even though it was a joke, you can tell like there's some like truth to it too a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, he kind of brings up a great point. Like, for example, you look at like Barack Obama, Tiger Woods, Alicia Keys, all these people like are biracial, you know, black and white. But we always often label them as like black. And he felt like for him, it wasn't until you did something notable that it's like, okay, the world sees you as black. You know what I'm saying?
Like black excellence.
Yeah, black excellence, right? And so it was that. And I think the biggest example for me was the Meghan Markle situation, right? Yeah. Where it's like also black and white. But you see even through the racism through that, like they expect their, like, you know, their child to come out like, oh, what color skin would he be? And you're like,
the colorism in there.
Yeah. And so with that, it was like kind of trying to process that and trying to really navigate life through those things. It came to the point where I was like, okay, like I am what I am. You know what I'm saying? No one can define it but me. It wasn't until I really get to Mason did I start to experience like the other side of it, right? Because growing up, it was like, okay, you're the white kid out of everyone. You're the most genetically and like literally you're the most white out of us. So yeah, you're the white kid. And I always took that as an insult because I'm like, well, being raised by a black dad in my black side of my family.
But it also,
like, yo.
Like when they called you the white kid and diving deeper into it, did it also just... It wasn't like because, you know, whiteness is uncool, whatever. It was also like they're othering you. Yeah. Like why are you othering me when I'm integral? I'm in this community. I'm in predominantly black spaces. and you're othering me in this space. Like, I'm in this junk just as much as you.
It's just like that's the whole thing. It's almost, I felt like it was the naive like nature of the community that I was in because there were no other white people, right? Mm-hmm. It really wasn't until I get to Mason and start finding myself in spaces where I'm like, oh, so I am the closest thing to a black person in these spaces. So they're like, all right, you're the black person. Mm-hmm. Did I start experiencing that and seeing it for what like the one drop rule actually meant? That was one thing I couldn't process growing up until I reached like my, young adolescence where I'm like, oh, so
like on the opposite, it reaffirmed like when you're in, so when you start involving yourself in predominantly white spaces, that also elevated the otherness and saying, okay, I gravitate, but I am a person of color. Yeah. Because I'm not going to be white in this space. Like when you're in a Order of the Omega,
exactly.
That's it's all the Greek fraternities, but there wasn't that many black people in that space. Yeah.
Rarely any. And so even like when I started, because I work at a corporate, I do that, and so starting to recognize that, I really start to feel that like love and camaraderie from like even like my other black employees, because they recognized it almost immediately. They're like, I know you're mixed, but you still a black person, they didn't even have to ask or anything like that. And it got so bad to the point, like when I first got to college, I felt like I had to like announce it whenever I was in majority black spaces.
How's an example of announcing it?
Yeah, it was weird because like,
you go to an event, you go to like a
I'll be enjoying myself a little too much, and I'm like, I'm like, if it was like a group session, right, where like you have to stand and talk, right, especially it was like during COVID too, like my first semester, I would have to feel like I have to like throw it out there because I felt the gaze, like growing up, I always felt that gaze where they're like, is he black?
Yeah.
Is he black? Is he's something, but I don't know. And so they always I could always see that look of like, I'm curious, but I don't want to ask. And so I felt like I had to like say like, oh, I am that, because.
How would you say it? You was like, hi, I'm Teon, I'm mixed.
Yeah, it was always that. Yeah, that's the thing though, bro.
Like just as much as you announce like your name, you had to say and I'm mixed. Like, my name is Philip Wilkerson, and I'm like,
my dad's black, my mom's white. I had to say that. And so it was even to that extent, because I look at my pops, because he's black and Filipino, but we always say he's black. You know what I'm saying? So it got to the point where I felt like I had to announce it, but wasn't until Mason like, you didn't have to say that. Someone like said like, you don't have to. We weren't really wondering or asking. And I'm like, oh word, because in high school for stuff like that, I always get like those side things. So like,
what are you?
What are you? Yeah. Like, I felt like they had to like earn my trust to ask that, and so and I always took like, not like offense to that, but I had to come to terms like, okay, you have some curiosity. I get it. I'm a little vague when it comes to that, but it wasn't until that I grow up and out of that like naivete, did I really embrace that. Okay, that is my identity, and nor should I have to feel like my identity has to be like affirmed or challenged. Yeah. And I felt like for most of like my high school career, it was that. It was like, well, you're not black enough. What do you know about cookout or anything like that? And I'm like,
it's like a quiz. Like why am I always on the pop quiz?
It was. I always was on edge for that. And in high school, I was a theater kid, so it was like black theater, right? You know what I'm saying? So
like Tyler Perry theater.
Almost, I'm not gonna lie, almost, right? You got like I think like it was like oh god,
I'm trying to think black theater. Like what is that? Like I went to Mount Vernon. Like we had Peter Pan.
So it's like it was like a show every year. So like our first show was like a Motown show, right? Okay. Who they were looking at, like Smokey. You know what I'm saying? You up, right? Or any other light skin role, or it was Michael Jackson. People were like, you gonna play the white Michael? You gonna play the white Michael? And I'm like, bro, like, oh man. Or it was like Romeo and Juliet. And so it was like Romeo and Juliet, a DC love story, right? And so
first of all, it's called Homeo.
Romeo, not Romeo.
I thought they changed it like homie.
Nah, like, that's a different kind of like
Homeo and Juliet. Like what is this? Okay, so Romeo and Juliet. I thought you said okay.
So the director, she turned into like the whole like Capulets and Montagues, the whole conflict. It's more like a light skin, dark skin sort of like colorism type, of, almost like a School Days sort of type thing, right? And so me, the lightest of them all, there's like, Lord Capulet. So
you got typecasted in roles.
And so it was stuff like that. And so not only did that introduce me to like my black, side a lot more, like the culture wise, but it did open like a gateway to those type of things where it's like you have certain, again, if it's like Afrocentric, it draws Afrocentric people. And so it would always be those type of people. They're like, well, we're talking about the cookout, but you don't know what that is given your like race. And I'm like, are you serious?
Yeah.
Or any other like aspect of that. They're like, well, you're white, so you wouldn't get it. And I'm like, bro, like,
yeah.
So and it would just like I'll be just catching strays. It wasn't even like it was like
I'm catching insults.
Yeah, and it was like being like wide open spaces and all that. Like, well, and I'm just like the punchline. I'm like, bro, what I do to you?
Yeah. Well, one thing I found very interesting, and this kind of came up with, Chris Donald, shout out to him, Frat, and then Michael Bush, but also is this tie to black culture and black organizations. You remember Phi Beta Sigma? I'm, the oldest and coldest. And I'm saying that because even as someone that is black, for me, joining those organizations has reaffirmed my blackness. Meaning, like, when someone's like, oh, Phil, you act white. I'm like, all right, whatever. But I'm in these black organizations and just flat out alone wearing the colors and being in all black male spaces and talking about the people that I'm connected to. I'm like, all right, well, maybe I, act white, but you can't tell me I'm nothing but a black man because I'm in this space. Did you feel like your pull to black Greek life was reaffirming for you and reaffirming for your blackness?
That was a great transition because, okay, so going back to the whole like community and bringing it up, right? So my high school, that was my first introduction to black Greek life, like down there, right? Like the principal, he was a man of Omega Psi Phi, and pretty much every teacher there had some sort of Greek affiliation. So it was always cool because during Black History Month, like, okay, now we're going to educate y'all about, the different organizations. And even during the school play, again, with Romeo and Juliet, they had a little tribute to that. You know what I'm saying? So
even in that joke?
Yeah, even in that.
Well, the Capulets had Sigmas or what?
I don't think you want to know that. So I'm just going to say.
Was it Alpha?
Yeah. They went by the old school thing, like, Alpha's light skin. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh. Okay. But playing off of that point,
they were, okay.
I often got typecast. So whenever I look at the culture and what it meant, I understood at a very young age. And I always knew, like, I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of that. And so I never, throughout high school, I didn't really have like a org. I was like, okay, all that. Like, I want to be involved in that. I naturally gravitated towards Sigma in high school, mainly because most of the teachers I was cool with, I was really
mentors.
They're like true mentors, either Sigmas or Zetas. And so they're like, that's one thing you should really try. And so even at that age, I was wise enough to not tell anyone what I was thinking, what I'm saying? Because they were like, don't you ever say what you want. Don't ever claim anything. Don't even think it right now. You're not even in college. So don't even like speak that into existence. But I always kept that in the back of my mind. And so when I did get to college, and then when I did meet the Sigmas my freshman year, it sort of understood why my Sigma and Zeta teachers was like, you could gravitate towards that. You just need to look at what it means. And so, for example, when I mentioned the whole thing about how I have to announce my race, the Sigmas were the first one to be like, we didn't really ask, nor do we really care why, what you are, or anything like that. And they asked me to actually go to explain myself, like, why do I do that? Why do I think that? And so they were like, we don't really care about those things, and mention the history of Phi Beta Sigma in relation to that with colorism and all that. I grew to really appreciate that, and that made me eager to join Phi Beta Sigma precisely for those reasons, and why I really am deep in the black community, because not only could that help affirm you and give you some closure on that, even in this space, we're not going to quiz you on that. And nor do I think that of any black Greek organization really does that, because you're here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You're here.
But also, and take it a step further, I think that in general, that's not just say black Greek organizations too, being involved in BSA, being involved in any majority black spaces is reaffirming for a black student. Yeah. Or additionally, thinking it from your journey, was it not the BSA? African American studies, right? Like one, I mean, I think, let me put a caveat. You do not need to be black to study African American studies. I would encourage everyone, even white students, to get involved in African American studies to understand a different culture. AKA Philip Wilkerson randomly has Asian studies minor from JMU. I don't know how I got it, but I do. But point is, this learning and all that, those are good things. And do you feel like that was also part of your rationale to get the African American studies, was to just really dive into history? Yeah,
it was always that. And even I really got to give props, like really huge like shout out to my pops for that, because once I expressed interest to him saying like, yeah, I really want to do Black Greek organizations, while he didn't join one, he went to Virginia State. And so he was familiar with all of that, right? And so as soon as I mentioned that, he was like, okay, let's sit down, let's watch this movie School Days real quick and all that. But also it's like from that, because even like when I was looking, most of my peers from high school either went to Howard, North Carolina A&T, or Morgan. Okay, they went to HBCU. Yeah, okay. And so it was, while I battled that, while I wanted to go to that, originally I majored in mechanical engineering. And so not many schools offer that. It was like a niche, like, major. But not only that, I was still a broke kid. You know what I'm saying? I wasn't getting offered a lot of money for that. So when I went to George Mason, because they did have both, part of the reason why I really like Mason, why I gravitate towards that, is because I was that high school kid that Googled, okay, what organizations do they have of the Divine Nine? And when I saw they had like at least a decent, like amount, like, okay, got 4 out of the 5 fraternities. Okay, I think that's good enough, right?
Because you looked up student orgs ahead of time. Yeah. Like just like not just but you looked like BSA and all that.
NAACP, ASA, all that. And so
that's good.
Yeah, because I was like, okay, if I don't go to an HBCU, I still want some, not the HBCU experience, but I want still like
a connection to a community.
Yeah, my community is still there.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and so I will often encourage any high schooler, especially like of color, to really look at what do they have for you, and to not get like discouraged. Because
and also look at, and I like the tip that you said is that, and I always share this too, is like, if you're a student, look beyond just the courses and the catalog. Look at who the professors look like. Yeah. Look at the spaces that are for me. Look at do they have the organizations for me? Because like that, that's going to be your real experience too, not just in the classroom. So that's pretty forward thinking. Like I don't know a lot of students that are looking. I mean, did we even have Mason 360, or you just like Google like NAACP?
Yeah, I just Googled. I got like student involvement. I remember looking at that page for FSL because the other schools looking at was UMBC. All they had was Sigma and Alpha. While I was leaning towards Sigma, I was like, okay, I want to see like, do they have more variety? Because I was always taught like, don't you just, especially now, don't like claim an org when you don't even know the people, right? Don't even claim like, oh, like that. Just like seriously, just like keep an open mind, look through that. And all they had, I think they had like 4 out of like the 9 organizations there.
Did they have the BSA and all that too, or no?
A little bit, but I could tell like just looking at the page, it wasn't like as involved or as like active or anything like that. Like I would look at the post. The last post was like in 2019, so this was like 2020.
So some of it, so it wasn't just Google. Some of it was the social media pages.
Yeah, it was social media, and like just going through this, like, hey, who is the most vibrant? And especially as it got down to the wire, where I really had to choose when COVID broke out, who was now starting to elevate that, who is still maintaining their like presence
virtually through that.
And so when I saw that most Mason students were like forward thinking in that regard, we're like, okay, well, we have to switch now. It wasn't like, I can imagine it was like they were phased by it. It didn't really give off that impression because they're like, okay,
they were still they were doing virtual programs, they were doing the Instagram live conversations. They were pivoting. Yeah. And they were still showing a community that you could still get plugged into digitally, which was good to see. So one of my thoughts is, now that you're entering the workspace, I mean, do you look at like, are you looking at organizations and what, like, do they have ERGs or BRGs? Do they have like a Black affinity group at that organization? Is that something like you're looking at now as a incoming, workplace professional?
Definitely for that, especially on the corporate side of things. Because for the company that I work at now, I entered through them through an Advancing Black, Pathways program. Okay. And so it was definitely that was affirming to me because, again, you have to interview face to face and all that, and all that. They're like, okay, like you're promising, definitely go through. Especially we see your commitment to all these causes and all these things. Because I had this love for the community, and that was brought up by the fact that I was raised in a predominantly black community. And so me asking questions like, okay, like what exactly does this entail? How does this advance like the community as you say it does? Like how does it actually enhance? I felt like there was a lot of, I got a lot of props for that and a lot of like affirmations. I was like, okay, like we know what community he like aligns with. And not to say something that I don't like align with like my white side at all or anything like that. And there's always something I try to ride the line on. It's like I'm black, but I will also recognize the privilege that comes with the way I look like. You know what I'm saying? Because they're always like that where like you won't understand or you won't like fully comprehend these type of things. My dad, he didn't see it that way because he's like, if you're black, you're black, But there's
I mean, and I'm not saying light skin or not. I'm just saying there's layers to identity. Like, I understand as a black male, I have a level of privilege of black females, right? Because they had they had the intersection of being a woman and that thing, or like we're learning about it. I'm a cisgender heterosexual black male, and I understand that my gay black male friends may have they don't have as much privilege as me. So there's layers to privilege, and so I think that's understandable.
I was about to say layers to like the struggle of like obstacles that you have in life, and so I was always conscious of that and carried myself as such. You know what I'm saying? To not like really put on the front of like, oh, even like where I'm from, like, oh, you had it hard or anything like that. Because when I got to Mason, it felt like a different type of thing was introduced in the sense now that I am in these predominantly black spaces. Now the opposite I experienced. It was like a lot of people like, oh, you're like loudmouth, you're ghetto. Where are you from? Oh, you're from the hood. And I'm like, bro, like I no, like so I felt like it was like the opposite like ends. And not only did that give me the realization that okay, that's something that's just a part of life. Not like part of life, but like depending on the space, you will be viewed in different lights. Right? Like, your struggles will be someone else's privileges or like that type stuff like that.
Like layers to it, right? Like understand perspectives in one space where you feel like you're oppressed. You might go to another genre and like, I'm living good. Like, it changes in different spaces.
Yeah, it truly changed. And my mindset for that grew like I should change along with that, like to be flexible and just to be comfortable in my own skin. But also no matter what, just be authentic to what I am in those spaces, whether I find myself in a predominantly black space or predominantly white space, to be authentic and to not like that. Because code switching, that's a different type of, that's a whole different discussion when it comes to these like biracial like kids that I experiences and all that. Because it felt like, not because I felt like I had a code switch for even like my own family, like for example, my white side versus my black side. Like it wasn't that way, but you could tell there was a different weight whenever I found myself at different family functions.
Different weight and different family functions.
It felt like the dialogue or anything like that. It felt like, okay, I'm going to avoid that topic. Not to say that, because my white side, they've always been cool about it and always been open and always been like accepting and forward thinking in the conversation, But I would always be conscious of that where it's like, okay, I don't want to. Not because I don't think they're the type to feel white guilt, but I didn't even want to entertain the conversation once I was aware of those concepts.
Read the room, basically.
Yeah, and definitely had to read the room.
Do you feel as someone like you and your sister, and you said the weight, that's a very heavy thing. Do you think, and this is just anecdotal, do you think my kids are going to have more weight in regards to reading the room than I do?
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you ever ask your dad, like, do you like say, Dad, I had to weigh I had to read the room harder than you have to read the room. Like, I don't know. Maybe. I don't know.
That's the thing with that. I would disagree with that to an extent because there have been plenty of spaces where it's just me and my pops and we give each other the look. Like we can understand, right? Yeah. And I like the fact, at least the age that I'm at now, like coming into like as an adult and as my own, I can now relate to him a lot more than I possibly could when I was younger, when I wasn't really paying attention to those things. But now that I'm at the age where those things are relevant to me, I am now part of the conversation, and I'm not seen as like let them just have some ignorance, all that. It's like now I have to read the room and along with him. Now I do have to follow his lead on that. And while I could be like, okay, I can like perhaps mingle more, I guess, if we're going that route, I try not to. And I do try to like stay more so to the read the room, act appropriate, like, you know what I'm saying, like assess the situation and then just go from there. And so
that's interesting.
I was going to say, I would say that's something, but again, I learned it from him to read the room and to act accordingly, you know, because I can, even for those tiny things, I could see the differences in the different spaces, like how he moved was very different.
Yeah.
So I will say that, even for my mom to some extent, like even the same thing for her, like same. It's on the different, it's like just a different spectrum.
Yeah, I remember. You know, it's like I'm thinking about this as they get older. You know, family. I think is a big thing too. You say family, like when they go to all my side of the family black function, right? Mm-hmm. They kind of stand out a little bit, and then when they go to all white function on there, they stand out a little bit. Like,
it's like either way, where
you're standing
like,
out,
the odd one out.
Yeah, like they're like. But also understand, I like that you get the nod. So it's like, I feel like, you know, this is a weird way. I have to continuously learn because, like, I think no matter what, you're 22, 23, I'm going to feel like I'm going to have to, if I'm around, I'm always going to have my kids back. Yeah. And, like, I like you said, the look, like maybe we're going to prep. Like before we go to this function, we prep, you know? And then while we're at the function, we give each other the look across the room. And then, maybe after the function, like, let's debrief. How was that? Like, did you catch that? You know, that kind of thing like that.
And so, we still do all that. And I will say, like, again, with my pops, it's like, take me to the barber shop or take me always, like, to those things. Like, I could tell while he never, like, flat out said it, I could at least read the vibes of, like, he was showing me the black culture and raising me along through that, but he never had to say verbatim, I'm raising you to be a black man, right? It was always something like, okay.
Because I was saying that, John. See, you said verbatim. I'm saying that joke verbatim to my kids.
Well, that's the thing. Like, you're giving clarity out front, right? Okay. For me, I had to piece it together. And so, like, take me to all these things, like the shared experience, even like the whole police talk and all those things.
Yeah, the police. Yeah, I had that too. Like,
and
be careful. Don't, you know.
Yeah, like those tips. Okay,
put your hand on the wheel. Don't
exactly.
Hop
like
out the car.
Turn on the light if it's at night. You know, type stuff.
Yeah.
He was raising me to be a black man, but he never verbatim said it. He was always just like reinforcing those ideals. So when the time came where it's okay, now that I'm growing into my own, what spaces do I primarily want to involve myself in? I naturally went along with my black side, but it was never like a question. You know, I never had that thing of like, oh, am I torn between two things? Like, I never really had that confliction for that. I never really had that thing of like, oh, am I torn between identities or anything like that? Because I felt like it was assigned, you know, it was like, I know I'm riding the line in between, but now in my older years and just looking at like, now find myself in more, again, like mixed spaces, you know, even just predominantly white, but also just mixed spaces in general. I'm like, okay, I see it's been assigned to me. I know how to carry myself through those like situations.
I don't know. You think maybe that's just the old school versus new school? Like, you know, my dad didn't really he talked about me, but like, I don't think we ever had a real heart to heart about his struggles being the only black male until like I was an adult. And I'm like, Dad, I could have used this conversation way earlier than college, you know what I'm saying? But like now he's talking to me as a man, and it was that old school like seen not heard. And now I'm on the opposite. Like I'm reading the history of Jesse Owens and reading race books to my son Bennett, who's saying all kinds of stuff like to me early was like, you know, George Washington owned people. I don't believe that's right. And I'm like, whoa, like I was like talking. He's like George Mason. I read the history about George Mason, and he had a plantation. I'm like, whoa, like my son is bringing that at 9 years old, and I'm like, okay, like. Well, we're just gonna have this conversation earlier. Yeah, but I wasn't talking like that.
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
My parents.
Yeah, same thing though. For at least your experience with that, it's like my pops. Like I never asked him. Since it wasn't until like around 2020, honestly, when those whole things started going down, and at that point I was already like 19. I'm entering college, and in that age of like reason. And again, as I pledged my freshman year, so fall semester I'm already coming into that like mindset. Did he really start opening up about his experiences and all that, as well as like shows me like a black man, but also like dealing through that because that's like how he met my mom and all that because he had to. My mom's from Minnesota, and so in the 80s, that's like
different.
White, like he was the black kid
in Minnesota. Yeah, wow.
And so
even though shout out to Prince.
No, I say shout out to Prince. Shout out to Prince.
That's all. I mean, that's all.
Again, that's it.
That's the only person. When I think of Minnesota and black, I think that's the first person I think is Prince, and I'm like, I can't. But yeah,
and this is like 5 years after Purple Rain for him. You know what I'm saying? So that's still fresh in the mind for that.
Yeah.
Nah, shout out. But being through there and being in those spaces,
a different time.
Yeah. I could definitely tell like it was a lot for him. Not like, like pressure wise and all that, but like just to maintain his identity through that. Right. And I can tell at least for him, he never like folded on his identity for that being from DC and doing like, he has never folded. And you could tell you're like, oh yeah, that's DC born and raised. Yeah. And that's how he taught me to like hold myself up like that. Like you're from PG. So always keep it as such. Maintain your pride and all that.
Remember where you're from. That's a big important. Like where you're from, and that's like even geographically, like a county, but also like I still think about this too. Like it's magnified, right? Like you are from Virginia, you're a Virginia boy. For my kids, but like magnify. Like don't forget where you're from. Like
like
your people from Africa.
Go beyond that.
Your people are from Africa from one side, and your people like it's just that identity to that is so core.
Yeah. And so again, as I've like learned and like grew up to more and more people, because I remember during high school I started a list of like interracial people who you didn't know, like biracial people who you didn't know were biracial.
Oh
right?
yeah, please.
Like,
what's that list?
Hold
man?
up, let me pull that up. Hold up.
Yeah,
like it was so many. Where I was like, hold up. Like
I feel like it's a quiz. Is Prince is biracial, right?
He is not. At least to my knowledge, he is not. If you look at both his parents, like hold up.
Okay.
Let me see. Hold up.
Well, I know what's name is like a quarter white, Malcolm X, because his mom was half black and half white from reading the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Yep. Let's see. Hold up.
There's a lot of
so many. Hold on. Let's see. Yes, famous mix. Okay. So because in high school, Logic. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, the Logic. Yeah,
Logic.
I did not know when I looked at Logic. I learned about that recently.
Yes. Yeah.
He's from Maryland too.
Yeah, he's from like Maryland, and so growing up, right, he started blowing up right when I was in like high school. So he started, like he kept saying, "Oh, I'm mixed," and for the first few, I'm not gonna lie. At first, I was kind of like that, and I was like, "No," because he kept getting clowned for it. We don't really care. We don't really care. Granted, in his case, he is more white passing than I am. Mm-hmm. Like you wouldn't be able to tell
unless you
knew.
Who's some other? Just a couple more people. Who's some other people?
It's a long list.
Yeah, just give me another random person.
I know Logic. How are you familiar with The Office? Like the show The Office?
Don't tell me Dwight.
No. Karen. So Rashida Jones.
Oh yeah. Okay, she's
daughter Quincy Jones.
Quincy Jones. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Who else? I knew that. I mean, that one's hard, but yeah, she's.
Yeah, so Lenny Kravitz and Lisa Bonet.
Okay, I knew about Lenny Kravitz.
Okay.
And Lisa Bonet.
The Rock.
Yeah, black. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Polynesian.
Yeah. Let's see, J. Cole.
See, come on, man. Don't insult me. J. Cole's my man. But J. Cole will say he's black.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To tell. Eric Andre, I don't know if you're familiar with that. The Eric
Andre. Oh, Eric, that dude that be clowning?
Yes.
I thought he was just black.
Yeah, same thing, bro. Like Zoe Kravitz. Well, we already knew that from that, of course.
Zendaya, right?
Yeah, Zendaya, Halle Berry.
David Justice.
Yes. Tracy Ellis Ross, Maya Rudolph. Jordan Sparks, Mariah Carey.
Jordan Sparks, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So I mean, like, so
same thing where it's just like all these, like, you think of black excellence when you think of most of these names.
It's like when they do. I mean, I ain't gonna lie, but like I think for black people is that we're claiming them because so much of the world has said negative things about black people, so that when we have examples of uplifting people, we're like, yo, we're taking that because we need that. We're not needing, well, not say need, but we want to show the world more positive examples of black people. Yeah. So if someone can claim blackness and you're showing us in a good light. But I will say this, the line between that is this, because once that said biracial person does something problematic, they gonna get it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
you gonna catch it, bro.
Get it. They're like, dang, that dude sold out. Kind of thing. So that's like,
it's
very hard
for that. And then another one. So I don't know if you're familiar with the singer Halsey.
Heard that name before, but not sure.
So that's what she looks like, right?
Oh yeah. Halsey, is that Paramore? No, that's Haley something, right?
Yeah. So Halsey, but that was one that was like okay. And then even like Meghan Markle, where it's like you have more in Logic, like more white passing, and all that. At least in the case of Meghan Markle, same thing. Where it's that I felt like that was the true like the case that epitomized that way of thinking, where it's like we get so much like flack for it, and often the world like appoints that title like black, but almost in a negative way to said person, right? Because like the moment they do that, the moment they become like do something notable, right? Or it's like they really stand out. It's like we have no choice but to claim them because no one, and I would say no one else will, but they will always be associated with that. They'll always be like, okay, like the mixed or not.
The world is othering them too.
Yeah,
so I think that's what it is. And I think additionally, besides the world othering people, I think also like I said, it's the ambassador part of it. Like this is a positive representation, and we always talk about uplifting. Someone talked to me the other day and was like, why is there a need for the term black excellence when there is no like white excellence? And the reason I believe there's a term black excellence to elevate successes of blackness is to really combat stereotypes and stuff. But the weight of black excellence is hard because you're like thinking like this, like for me to be recognized as black, I got to go above and beyond and be excellent. There's a lot of weight to that, right? Like it can't be, there's no such thing as black mediocrity. Like hashtag black mediocrity, hey, black guy is just doing enough, right? Like, it's like black, you got to be excellent, and there's a weight. I read another article. It's like the weight of being a black excellence is like for us to really celebrate ourselves. Like we got to celebrate. Like we got to we got to be like the PhD 4.0.
Yeah, you have to go above and beyond.
Yeah, to be black excellence. But hey, whatever. I'll take it though, because the only reason why I say I take that at the end of the day, because if I'm going to strive for that and strive to be considered part of black excellence, at the end of the day, whether it has pressure or not, I'm still better off than mediocrity, right? So,
period.
So, whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is the part of the show. This has been a great conversation. Like I said, could be way more deeper and but called Shot for Shot. You get to ask me any random question. I get to ask you any random question. You want to go first? I'll go first.
You go first.
All right. So, in your African American studies. That's a little bit of everything. I'm interested in learning more about what has been one of your favorite classes in that minor so far. So
this one, over the summer and really going through, I started like what sociology like means, right? And so and also like women studies as well. So those two have been my favorite standout things going along into that, like black women. And
so is that absorbed in it? Is it African American studies / women's studies? Or?
No. So it's like for this particular elective, it was more so like expanding like the black women's struggle. Because I took 2 classes, even on part of my honors curriculum, I had to take like a women's studies class, and it was like a black women's studies, and and so it was like one semester in between each of them. So it was very interesting learning that because I took the women's study class first. And thankfully, the professor who was doing that, she really dove into like suffrage and the abolitionist movement.
Okay, voting rights and all that.
Yeah, and the dichotomy between the two organizations and movements, and how there was very similarities between that, but we also have to like really like look at the flaws of that race played into that.
Yeah, like they want to say white women can vote.
Yes, like the whole movement. Like if you look at like white women's, their argument was like, well, how come black men can vote but we can't? And people are like, whoa, they making a point. Hold up, and so. But then
if you look at it, like they weren't like super advocating for black people to vote; they were voting for white women. To vote.
Because you look at Sojourner Truth and how she wanted to get involved, and they're like, don't do that. And again, they have the famous quote, "Ain't I a woman?" You know.
Yeah.
And so from that into like the black women's like study, like for that to see a lot of that carried over, I was like, this is phenomenal. Just going through it. But for you, let me ask, okay, so for your sons growing up, at least through that, like through that, right? Do you have any concerns or fears that they might, like, of challenges that they might face growing up being biracial?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for bringing it up. I had this like one time, and I said, I think I wrote it or I put it on paper, and I think I need to find it. It was more like a letter to my future sons. And it was like more so like, I fear the day that you come home and someone called you the N-word and you did not know how to react, right? I fear the day that like this is like an anxiety thing I think a lot. I fear the day that you were, like I said, playing around with some kids and then you got isolated for doing the same things as a white kid. And like, I fear the day that like you get pulled over for the first time and it's just not a good situation. So it's like this weird, like, I understand in my mind, I'm trying to prepare my sons for the world before the world does it for me. And like, but also what, with anxiety, right, is like, but also I can't control the world, right? This is a home, your home should be your safe base, right? And no matter what, my kids should be able to be themselves in these four walls of my home. But then when they go out there in the world and they go out there in the world, they're at school right now, I have no control. And I think all parents, that's the reality of the world. Your kids are going to, like, you cannot control anything beyond your own environment. And I think the extra layer of safety and all that, that's any parent's anxiety. So I will say that's a blanketed statement, like about getting hurt and wearing their seatbelt and all that stuff. That's every parent. But for me as a black man, I'm adding not only the seatbelt part, I'm adding race to that. Like the dangers. You ever heard that meme? Like being black is dangerous, but it's fun, right?
Yeah.
Like, I ain't gonna lie, that's just a bad experience. And the funny thing is, like, for me, I would not want to be anyone other than myself. I love who I am. But also at the same time, like, I understand by carrying this visible identity, the world is going to view me a certain type of way, no matter what I feel about myself. That's why I always kind of joke when you see that OJ thing, like, I'm not black, I'm OJ. Well, okay, in your mind you can, but the world's not going to see you as just OJ. The world sees you as black, right?
Yeah.
No matter what navigated space. If I just say, hey, just think me as Phil, that is a weird, like, I have to understand I am Phil that is black. Like, no matter how much I did not want to connect with blackness, I am black, like, physically on my skin. And so I think that's my biggest thing with my boys. Like, like I said, I try to prepare them. I think maybe, I can fully have enough awareness that maybe some of my discussions or some of my anxieties is like, they're not even thinking about no police. I'm like, you better watch out for the police. Like, that's my anxieties, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I'd rather me be overcautious and anxious than my kids go out there in the world and be unprepared and something bad happen. And they come back to me and they say something like, Dad, why didn't you tell me about this? Or why didn't you tell me how hard this was? Or why didn't you tell me that this was an unfair system that I live in? Like, you set me up. You didn't didn't give me a heads up. Yeah. And I was like, we talked about it. I talked about it since you was 6. And you're like, well, maybe Dad, you talked about it a little too early. But I'd rather have, I did too early, I did too much, I was extra, than
not do it at all.
Not do it all and be less than.
Phenomenal way of thinking.
That. And we'll see. Maybe they'll be all like, I don't know, maybe they'll be like, Dad, my dad was crazy about it, but whatever. But the point is, I think that's a lot of parents, and for those that I've shared that sentiment and with a lot of my friends that are now fathers like me, and I think by putting that on wax, I think it's reaffirming to see, like, there's other dads that like me and my best friend, we talk about this all the time, and it's like, okay, I'm not the only one going through this. This cycle.
It's affirming that you're not alone in that struggle. It's very, very affirming.
Parents, they don't teach you that. Okay, I'll tell you this too. They talk about changing diapers, and I don't know if there's as many books like how to raise your kids to fight racism. I mean,
I'm about to say
maybe Dr. Kendi X, How to Be Anti-Racism for Kids. But like that jump real, man. Like
fighting it's like, yo, especially when you start to become like cognitive like of it. Because like, there's that certain point in your life like, oh, so this is real. And again, no matter what age it hits, it's still like
it's gonna hit.
It hits you.
That's what I think there's a question we can go off later, but like maybe another time. But I have, when I was in lots of classes, I said, even in my counseling class for George Mason's math, they asked you like, when did you realize you were insert inner identity, right?
Yeah.
Like, when did you realize you were a girl or boy, right? And like, when we were all playing with the Barbies and they made me play, like I couldn't play with that, right? Mm-hmm. I knew from preschool I was black.
Yeah.
I looked at my skin, I looked at the other kids in the class, saw white kids, black kids. I was like, I am black.
You're like there's a difference. There's a difference.
I really never understood how someone can go the whole life and be like, wait a minute. But I have seen other people, maybe they never talked about it. And they hit that wall. Mm-hmm. They hit that wall like, oh, wait, like I'm black. They never talked about race or that stuff. So yeah, that is what it is. All right. Well, this has been a great episode. This is the part of the show called Shout Outs and Plugs. So shout out, show love to anyone you want to show love to, and then plugs. These are ways that the listeners can get in touch with you. Also, if you have anything that you're working on that they can support. So shout outs and plugs.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Shout out to you for having me on here. I'm going to say thank you. I just want to shout out my fam, both my parents, for raising me, but also educating me on this topic in a way that I can properly describe it today and go about it. For plugs, I'm definitely going to plug in my side hustle, Vendetta Customs, working to get an LLC, become a licensed vendor. But for all of my Divine Nine listeners, I specialize in paddles, shirts, shields, anything you name it, probate staffs, sledgehammers. I'm about to say, hold on, anything you want, I could definitely do it. So definitely hit that up at Vendetta Customs DMV on Instagram. And for those interested in connecting with me on LinkedIn, my profile is Teon Frazier Jr. So you should.
And I'll put that in the show notes. Shout out to him.
Appreciate it.
Well, Positive Filter listeners, this has been a great episode. Please support Teon and all the things that he's working on. As you know, every episode is dedicated to the memory of my late father-in-law. So please consider donating to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund for all the work he did. If you're a member of the Mason Nation, also consider submitting a patch for Patriots to send a kind note to someone else at the Mason Nation. That's just a program that I'm working on and want to elevate. As you know, any like, subscribe, or review of this podcast helps elevate it. So please give a moment on Apple or Spotify to give a like or review to help elevate this podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we're out.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.